The Royal Starship Silver Crest moved quietly through the deep space lanes. Inside, Princess Lyrae sat in her private chamber, reading the daily reports from her advisors. Her mission was simple but important. She was traveling to a distant allied world to discuss trade and peace terms. It was supposed to be a smooth journey. She had an escort ship and a crew of skilled guards. But things rarely go as planned in the outer territories. The first sign of trouble came as a low, distant thud. Somewhere in the ship's lower deck, a crew member rushed in and informed her that one of the main engines had taken damage from a hidden asteroid fragment. The impact was strong enough to tear part of the outer hull. The captain decided they had no choice but to land on the nearest habitable planet for emergency repairs. Lyrae's stomach tightened. She had heard rumors about this planet. It was a frontier world, half settled, half wild. Dangerous creatures roamed its surface, and some parts were controlled by raiders. Still, it was better than drifting helplessly in space. The descent was rough. The damaged engine groaned and shook the ship. Lightning storms from the planets. Thick clouds struck the hull. Lyrae held onto her seat, silently reciting the calming lesson she had learned during royal training. Her guards stood ready, their eyes scanning the displays for danger. When they finally landed, it was on a wide, rocky plain surrounded by jagged cliffs. The captain told Lyrae to stay inside while repairs began. But within minutes, a second disaster struck. The sudden shockwave from deep underground rattled the ship. The ground split open in several places. A loud screech came from the cliffs, followed by shadows moving fast toward the landing site. The guards rushed out to fight off whatever was coming. In the chaos, part of the plane collapsed, separating Lyrae from the rest of her crew. She found herself on the other side of a deep crack in the ground, cut off from the others. She tried calling out, but the wind carried her voice away. Lyrae looked around for cover and saw an opening in the cliffside. She ran toward it, her boots slipping on the loose stones. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of metal. She moved deeper into the passage, hoping it would lead to safety. Then she heard footsteps. They were not the heavy steps of her guards, nor the uneven shuffle of a wild animal. These were firm, steady, and unhurried. Lyrae froze. A tall figure appeared from the shadows, wearing worn but strong armor. His helmet visor glowed faintly in the dim light. In one hand, he held a long rifle, though it was pointed toward the ground. The man stopped a few steps away and lifted his visor. His face was human. He had short brown hair, clear eyes, and a calm expression. "You're not from here," he said in a steady voice. Lyrae straightened her back, keeping her tone as even as she could. "No, I am a traveler. My ship was forced to land after damage." The human studied her for a moment. "Name's Marco. I'm stationed on this planet for security patrol. You're in a dangerous zone. Creatures and raiders both pass through here." She glanced toward the cliff opening. "My guards are on the other side of a ground break." "I was separated." Marco nodded once. "Then you need protection. I can take you to a safer place." Lyrae hesitated. Royal training had taught her not to place trust too quickly, especially in unknown territory. But she also knew she was alone, unarmed, and far from her people. This human did not seem threatening, yet his calmness felt strange. "You expect me to follow a stranger?" she asked, her voice careful. Marco's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you want to stay alive out here, yes. I'm not asking for trust. Just follow for now." The faint sound of screeches echoed from the cliffs again. Lyrae realized they were getting closer. Without another word, she stepped forward. Marco turned and led the way through the rocky tunnel. As they moved, she studied him. His armor was scratched in several places, but well kept. He carried a pack with supplies, and his movements were precise, like someone used to constant danger. After some time, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. Marco motioned for her to stop. He crouched low and scanned the area outside. The air was cooler here, and faint sunlight filtered through cracks above. When he was sure the path was clear, he guided her toward a large rock formation where a small shelter had been built from scavenged parts. Inside was a narrow bed, a lantern, and a storage box. It's not much, Marco said. But the walls keep most things out. Lyrae stepped inside, keeping her posture composed. You live here. Sometimes I move between posts. This is one of my safe spots. He offered her a flask of water. She took it with a nod, careful not to drink too quickly. Marco then reached into his pack and pulled out a small ration bar, placing it on the bed beside her. Eat. You'll need strength. We'll move again when it's dark. Less chance of being seen by the wrong kind of people. Lyrae took a small bite, her eyes never leaving him. And what kind of people would that be, raiders? He replied simply, they'd see someone like you as a prize. She kept her face calm, hiding the fact that his words sent a cold shiver down her spine. She could not let him know her true status. If he suspected she was a princess, it might change everything. For now, she would keep her secret. Marco began checking his rifle and reloading energy cells. Lyrae sat quietly, thinking of her guards and wondering if they were still fighting. She told herself that tomorrow, perhaps, she would find a way to reunite with them. But deep inside, she knew her path had already changed. She was now under the protection of a human soldier whose calm gaze seemed to see far more than she wanted to reveal. And whether she liked it or not, her survival might depend entirely on him. The air outside the small shelter was dry and carried the faint smell of dust. The light from the twin moons made the rocky landscape look pale and strange. Marco stood at the entrance, scanning the horizon with sharp, steady eyes. Princess Lyrae sat inside, still keeping her back straight and her voice quiet whenever she spoke. When the first signs of night fully settled in, Marco motioned for her to stand. We move now, he said. The dark helps hide us. Most hunters on this planet see worse at night than in daylight. But we still need to stay careful. Lyrae followed him out of the shelter. The ground crunched under their boots as they moved. The wind carried them. Sound of distant creatures. But nothing came close. After some time, Marco suddenly raised his hand, signaling her to stop. He crouched low and pointed toward a shape in the shadows ahead. Several glowing eyes reflected the moonlight. A pack of four-legged beasts with long tails and hooked claws was blocking their path. They hunt in groups, Marco whispered. If they circle us, it will get bad. Without waiting for them to come closer, he stepped forward. Rifle ready, his first shot flashed bright, striking one of the beasts and sending the rest scattering into the darkness. The echo faded quickly, leaving only the sound of the wind again. Lyrae felt a strange mix of relief and curiosity. He had acted without hesitation, his movements smooth and controlled. Even in danger, his breathing stayed steady. She had seen many guards in her life, but few moved like this human soldier. They walked on, the path winding between jagged cliffs. Marco led the way with confidence, as though he had walked these routes many times. Lyrae stayed close, scanning the shadows just in case. By midnight, they reached another shelter, this one larger and built from old metal panels. Marco opened the door slowly, checked inside, then waved her in. The space had a working heater, a water filter, and a small table. You could rest here for a few hours, Marco said. We'll head out at first light toward an old outpost. There's a chance the transmitter there still works. Lyrae sat at the table and removed her travel gloves. You seem to know every corner of this place. Years of patrol work. Marco replied, I've been sent to worse planets than this. At least here the air is clean enough to breathe without a mask. He poured some water into a cup and handed it to her. She accepted it with a polite nod. Why are you here alone? She asked. Sometimes patrols split to cover more ground, he said. I was moving between posts when I saw smoke from your landing site. That's how I found you. His words carried no pride, just simple truth. Later, as she lay on a patrol in the corner, Lyrae noticed that Marco did not lie down to sleep. Instead, he sat near the door with his rifle across his knees, listening for any sound outside. You are not resting, she said quietly. Not yet, he answered. To people sleeping at the same time out here is a bad idea. You plan to keep watch all night, just until the sky starts to lighten. Lyrae looked at him for a moment longer before turning away. She had been taught to keep her emotions hidden, but something about this man's quiet dedication unsettled her, in a way she could not explain. The next morning came with pale golden light spreading across the cliffs. They left the shelter early, walking toward a canyon that would lead them closer to the outpost. The path was narrow, with high rock walls on both sides. Halfway through, they came across a small alien tribe. The people were tall, with skin marked by natural patterns and eyes like polished stone. They carried spears and wore cloaks made from animal hides. Marco slowed his pace and kept his hands visible. "Let me speak first," he murmured. The tribe leader stepped forward, blocking the path. His voice was low but firm. "Strangers pass through our land. What do they bring?" Lyrae understood that in this place, respect was as important as strength. She stepped forward beside Marco and lowered her head slightly. "We bring no harm," she said. "Only passage. We will be gone before the sun is high." The leader studied her, then Marco, then the supplies they carried. After a long pause, he nodded. "You may pass, but avoid the eastern ridges, raiders. Hunt there?" Marco gave a short nod of thanks. The group moved aside, and the two travelers continued on their way. Once they were clear, Marco glanced at her. "You handled that well." "It was not difficult," she replied, though she knew it could have ended badly if the leader had felt disrespected. By late afternoon, the canyon opened into a wide plain. In the distance, the broken shape of the old outpost rose against the horizon. Its walls were half collapsed, but parts of its roof still stood. "That's where we're going," Marco said. "If we're lucky, the transmitter will still send a signal. If not, we'll find another way." Lyrae nodded, though her thoughts were elsewhere. The encounter with the tribe had reminded her how far she was from the safety of her own people. She still had not told Marco who she truly was. Yet he had treated her with the same steady manner from the start. As night began to fall again, they stopped at a small rise overlooking the outpost. Marco set up a small campfire, shielded by rocks to keep the light hidden. They ate in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire filling the air. Finally, Lyrae spoke. "You could have left me when you found me yesterday. It would have been easier for you." Marco looked up from his food. "Easier isn't always right. You needed help." That was enough. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, unsure how to answer. When the fire died down, Marco took first watch again. Lyrae lay under the clear night sky, her mind turning over the events of the past day. She had been taught that humans were unpredictable, sometimes reckless, sometimes dangerous. Yet the one beside her was something else entirely. For the first time since her ship had been forced down, she felt the smallest spark of trust. The morning came with a dull, gray light spreading over the plain. Marco was already awake. Checking his rifle and securing his pack, Princess Lyrae rose quietly, brushing the dust from her cloak. The old outpost stood in the distance like a broken tooth against the horizon. They began their walk across the plain. The air was still, but the ground was marked with strange patterns. Lyrae noticed wide, deep tracks pressed into the soil, some shaped like claws, others like heavy boots. Marco crouched beside one set of prints and studied them. "Raiders," he said. "These are fresh. They must have passed through here in the night." Lyrae's chest tightened. She knew the stories about frontier raiders, mercenaries who lived outside the law, taking what they wanted from travelers and settlements. "Do you think they saw us?" she asked. "Not yet," Marco replied. "But they will if we're not. Careful. Stay close to the rocks." They changed their path, moving along a ridge where loose stones crunched under their boots. Lyrae kept scanning the open ground below, half expecting to see figures chasing them. Around midday, they reached a narrow gap between two cliffs. The shadows inside the pass were cool, but they felt heavy, as though something was watching. Marco held up his hand, signaling for silence. He moved forward a few steps, then stopped again. Lyrae followed his gaze to a broken metal plate lying in the dirt. It looked like part of a vehicle, scorched and bent. This was a transport, Marco said quietly, probably taken by raiders. "Weeks ago. No survivors." Lyrae swallowed, her mind picturing the fate of those who had been here before. She tried to keep her expression calm, but her heartbeat quickened. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly through the canyon. Not the heavy steps of one person, but the lighter, uneven rhythm of several. Marco guided Lyrae toward a side tunnel and pressed his back to the wall. A moment later, 3 alien figures passed by. They wore patchwork armor and carried short rifles. Their faces were hidden behind masks made from animal bone and metal scraps. Lyrae held her breath until they were gone. Marco's voice was low but firm. Scouts, the main group will be close. We can't head straight to the outpost now. We'll circle around from the north. The detour took them through a valley of dry grass and twisted trees. The ground was softer here, and their footsteps made almost no sound. Lyrae noticed the way Marco kept glancing in all directions, never letting his guard drop. By late afternoon, they had climbed to a high ridge overlooking the outpost from the opposite side. The building's roof had collapsed in several places, and one corner was blackened by fire. Rusted antennas leaned at odd angles from their position. They could see movement below. Raiders were camped near the main entrance, their small fires sending thin smoke into the air. At least a dozen of them were there, and more might be inside. Lyrae looked at Marco. How do we reach the transmitter with them there? He studied the layout for a moment. There's a service tunnel on the far side. If it hasn't caved in, we can get inside without them seeing us. But we have to move before night. Once it's dark, they'll post guards all around. They descended the ridge, keeping low and using boulders as cover. Every step felt longer than it should. Every sound louder. Twice they froze as raiders passed nearby, speaking in a language Lyrae did not understand. When they reached the far side of the outpost, they found the entrance to the service tunnel half buried. Under rubble, Marco began clearing stones with quiet, deliberate movements. Lyrae helped, her hands growing sore from lifting sharp, dusty pieces. Finally, the opening was clear enough to slip through. The tunnel was narrow and smelled of rust and stale air. They moved in silence, the only sound the faint drip of water somewhere ahead. The tunnel opened into a storage room lined with old crates. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and dust coated the floor. Marco checked the hallway beyond. Clear. For now, the transmitter room should be on the east side. They walked through dim corridors, their footsteps muffled by layers of dirt. Here and there, broken lights flickered weakly, powered by whatever was left of the outpost systems. At last, they reached a small chamber filled with control panels. The main transmitter sat in the center, its surface scratched but intact. Marco knelt and began opening a side panel. The power's low, but I can get it running long enough to send a signal. Lyrae stayed by the door, listening for any sound of raiders inside the building. She could feel the tension building in her chest. Then she heard it soft, quick footsteps approaching. Marco noticed her look and reached for his rifle. Stay behind me, he said. The footsteps stopped just outside the room. A shadow moved across the floor, then another. 2 raiders stepped in, their weapons raised. Before they could speak, Marco fired once, the shot ringing through the small space. One raider dropped, the other fled down the hallway. They'll alert the others, Marco said quickly. We have to finish this now. He returned to the transmitter, fingers moving fast over the controls. A low hum filled the air as the machine came to life. The signal light flickered weakly, then glowed steady. Signal sent, Marco said. With luck, someone will hear it before the raiders find us. Lyrae nodded, her eyes on the doorway. She knew they could not stay here long. The sound of distant shouts was already rising from somewhere deeper in the outpost. Marco grabbed his pack and motioned toward the tunnel. We leave the way we came. Now, they moved quickly, retracing their steps through the dusty corridors. The shouts grew louder, and the thud of boots on metal echoed behind them. By the time they reached the storage room, the noise was close. Marco stopped and aimed his rifle at the tunnel entrance. You first, he said. Lyrae slipped through the narrow opening and began climbing over the rubble. Marco followed, glancing back once to see shadows moving toward them. When they emerged into the fading light outside, Marco pulled a piece of broken metal over the opening, hiding it from sight. They didn't stop until they reached the safety of the rocks far from the outpost. Only then did Marco lower his rifle. "They know we were there," he said. "They'll be looking for us now." Lyrae looked toward the distant campfires of the raiders. She felt the weight of the danger pressing on them more than ever. The signal was sent, but their real struggle was only beginning. The sun was sinking behind the jagged cliffs, throwing long shadows across the plain. Princess Lyrae and Marco crouched behind a row of rocks, watching the outpost from a distance. The campfires of the raiders flickered against the rusted walls, their smoke curling into the evening air. "They will come looking for us soon," Marco said quietly. "The moment they realize the transmitter is working, they will know someone used it." Lyrae adjusted her cloak to shield against the cooling wind. "Then we cannot wait here." "What is your plan?" Marco's eyes stayed on the outpost. "We cannot outrun them in the open. They have faster vehicles. Our best chance is to make the outpost dangerous for them so they stop chasing us. I will set traps and force them to scatter. Then we slip away." Lyrae did not know much about human military tactics, but she understood the idea. It was risky. Yet standing still and waiting to be caught was worse. They moved in the deepening twilight, circling the outpost until they reached the broken side wall. Marco led her through a narrow gap and into the ruins. The smell of oil and rust was stronger inside. Old machinery sat in corners, covered in dust and cobwebs. Marco wasted no time. He began moving crates and debris into narrow hallways to block passage. From his pack, he pulled small devices that looked like metal discs. He placed them on the floor, adjusting tiny dials on their sides. "What are those?" Lyrae asked. "Shock mines," Marco said. "Non-lethal, but they will knock anyone down hard enough to stop them. Enough noise and confusion, and we have a path out." While he worked, Lyrae searched the rooms for anything useful. In one storage space, she found an old energy lantern and a spool of wire. When she brought them to Marco, he gave a brief nod. "Good," he said. "We can use the wire to make trip lines." They worked quickly, their movements quiet but urgent. By the time the last mine was armed, the night had fully fallen. The fires of the raider camp outside glowed brighter now. Then the sound came. The low growl of engines starting. Lyrae's chest tightened. "They are moving," she whispered. Marco's face stayed calm. "Get ready." The first raiders entered through the main gate, their boots clanging on the metal floor. They carried rifles and blades, their voices rough as they shouted to each other. A loud crack echoed as one of them tripped a wire. A stack of metal plates crashed down from above, scattering sparks. The raider stumbled backward, shouting in alarm. Another stepped onto a shock mine. A burst of blue light lit the hallway, and he collapsed with a cry. The others hesitated, unsure how many more traps lay ahead. Marco used the pause to his advantage. He fired 2 shots toward the ceiling, hitting a loose beam. The beam fell across the path, blocking it completely. Dust filled the air, and the raiders began shouting louder. "Time to move," Marco said. They slipped through the side corridor toward the service tunnel. But before they could reach it, a group of raiders burst through a side door. The narrow hall left no space to dodge. Marco pushed Lyrae behind a support pillar and fired at the ground. Near the raiders' feet, the shots sparked against the metal floor, forcing the raiders back. One of them rushed forward anyway, swinging a blade. Marco caught his arm and twisted sharply, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. He shoved the raider aside and pulled Lyrae toward the tunnel. They ran through the dark passage, the shouts of pursuit echoing behind them. The smell of smoke reached them, and Lyrae realized part of the outpost was burning. At the tunnel exit, Marco stopped and knelt. "I will cover us until we reach the rocks. When I say go, you run and do not stop." Lyrae nodded, her heart pounding. Marco stepped out first, firing toward the shapes moving in the firelight. The flashes from his rifle lit the rocky ground ahead. "Go," he called. Lyrae ran, her boots striking the dirt in quick, hard steps. The cool night air rushed past her face. She could hear Marco close behind, his rifle firing in short bursts. When they reached the cover of the rocks, they crouched low, listening. The shouts were still there, but fainter now. The traps and the fire had slowed the raiders. Just as Marco had planned, he lowered his rifle and glanced at her. We bought some time. It is not enough to wait for help here, but enough to reach a safer spot. Larray breathed deeply, steadying herself. How far? There is a ridge about 2 hours from here. If we can reach it, we will have better cover and a high view of the area. We can see anyone coming long before they reach us. They began walking again, keeping to the shadows. The fires of the outpost flickered in the distance, smaller with each step. For the first time that night, Larray allowed herself a small measure of relief. She knew the danger was not over, but she had seen how Marco moved, how he planned, and how he stayed calm even when surrounded. She had been trained to hide fear. But here in the dark, following the steady figure of the human soldier, she felt something different, the faint but growing belief that they might survive this. The cold wind swept through the mountain valley, carrying the smell of snow. Far in the distance, dark clouds gathered, hiding the twin suns of the alien world. The human soldier named Daniel stood on the rocky ledge, looking down toward the enemy camp far below. His eyes followed the faint glimmer of metal as alien war machines moved in formation. Behind him, Princess Alira stood with her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her calm face hid the storm inside her heart. She had learned much from the human soldier in the past days, but this would be their first real battle together. You can still turn back, Daniel said in a low voice. If they see you here, you will be their first target. I will not run, Alira answered. If my people see me fight beside you, they will know the truth about the humans. That will matter more than my safety. Daniel did not smile, but his eyes softened. He had fought in many wars, on many worlds, but he had rarely seen someone from another species stand with humans so willingly. The sound of engines rumbled through the valley. Enemy patrols moved closer. Daniel motioned for her to follow, and they climbed down the rocky slope toward their hidden camp. There, a small group of human soldiers prepared weapons and checked communication gear. The air was tense, but not with fear. It was the tense focus of soldiers who knew exactly what they had to do. A tall soldier named Brooks handed Alira a small communicator. Stay close to Daniel and speak into this if you see anything we miss. She nodded, holding it, as if it were a rare treasure. Human technology still felt strange in her hands, but she had learned enough to know its power. As the suns dipped lower, Daniel gathered the small team and outlined the plan. We hit their supply lines at nightfall. No heavy attacks. We keep moving, strike fast, and disappear before they can respond. If we do this right, they will not even know how many of us there are. The humans moved with quiet precision, blending into the shadows. Alira followed closely, her eyes scanning the darkened slopes. Every movement in the distance made her heart beat faster. But she kept her steps steady. When they reached the first target, Daniel signaled the group to spread out. A small convoy of enemy supply carriers was parked near the riverbank, guarded by a handful of soldiers from Alira's own planet. Her chest tightened at the sight. She recognized one of them as a commander she had seen in the royal court. Daniel placed a small device on the ground and activated it. The device emitted a faint pulse of light, and moments later, a sharp burst of static cut through the night air. The enemy guards clutched their helmets in confusion as their communications went dead. The humans struck fast. In seconds, they disabled the supply carriers without harming the drivers. Explosions lit the night, and the convoy's fuel tanks burned with bright orange flames. The enemy soldiers shouted, trying to regroup, but the humans had already vanished into the darkness. Alira could hardly believe how quickly it was over. They moved to the second target before the enemy could react. This time, Alira saw more clearly how the humans worked. Each soldier seemed to know where the others would be without needing to speak. Their trust in one another was silent but absolute. When they reached the second site, they found an enemy outpost guarding a bridge. Daniel crouched low beside her. "We take out the bridge. They cannot move their war machines into the valley. Are you ready?" She swallowed her fear and nodded. The humans placed charges along the support beams while Daniel kept watch. A sudden voice called out from the shadows. "Who goes there?" Alira froze. The voice was from another soldier of her people. For a moment, her loyalty pulled into directions. But then she saw Daniel signaling her to stay hidden. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "It is me," she called softly, keeping her voice calm. The guard stepped closer, eyes wide in surprise at seeing the princess. Before he could raise an alarm, Alira spoke quickly. "The humans are not your enemy. We must stop the war before it destroys us all." The guard hesitated. In that moment, the charges detonated. The bridge collapsed into the rushing river below. Daniel grabbed Alira's hand, pulling her back into cover as debris rained down. The guard did not fire. They retreated into the mountains as enemy searchlights swept the area. Alira could feel her heart pounding, but she also felt something else. Resolved. Later, in the safety of a hidden cave, the humans rested. Daniel sat by the fire, checking the maps on his wrist display. "We have bought ourselves some time, but they will come for us in force." Alira sat beside him. "Then, we will be ready. My people need to see that humans fight not for conquest, but for survival and for allies. If I must be the one to show them, I will do it." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "You are braver than most soldiers I have known." Outside, the storm finally broke. Snow falling in heavy silence over the mountains. The battle ahead would be harder than anything they had faced, but for the first time, both human and princess knew they would not be facing it alone. The night sky above the human outpost was darker than usual, covered with heavy clouds. The wind carried the distant sound of alien machines preparing for battle. Inside the command tent, Tomas stood over the large holographic map, studying the approaching enemy formations. Across from him, Princess Leora sat quietly, her silver eyes fixed on the map. She could see the danger to both her people and the humans if the coming attack happened. "This is not just another battle," Tomas said, breaking the silence. "If they break through here, they will reach the inner settlements. We cannot let that happen." Leora leaned forward, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "Your forces are strong, but you are few compared to their army. You will be overwhelmed." Tomas looked at her, his face calm but determined. "We have fought against worse. The question is, are you ready to stand with us?" The princess hesitated. Her upbringing had taught her to think first of her own people, but she also knew that the council faction behind this attack was ruthless. They would not stop with humans. They would take over her kingdom next. In that moment, Leora's thoughts drifted back to when she had first met Tomas. She remembered his steady voice when speaking to frightened villagers. She remembered his refusal to leave injured soldiers behind, even when it put him in danger. He had shown a kind of strength she had never seen in her own court. "I will fight," she said at last, "but I must speak to my people first. If I act without their trust, I will be nothing more than a traitor in their eyes." Tomas gave a small nod. "Then you have tonight to win them over. Tomorrow, the storm will come." Leora left the human outpost under the guard of 2 soldiers and returned to her temporary camp, where her loyal attendants and warriors waited. They looked at her with mixed expressions: relief that she was unharmed and suspicion because she had been in human company for so long. One of her commanders, General Varek, stepped forward. "Your Highness, we are ready to withdraw before the enemy arrives. The humans can hold their own battle. Why should we risk our lives for them?" Leora walked slowly among her people, meeting their eyes one by one. "Because their fight is our fight. The council faction that marches here will not stop at this outpost. They will take the valleys, the ports, and the sky routes. They will crush every kingdom that does not bow to them." The camp murmured with uneasy voices. Varek narrowed his eyes. "And you trust this human soldier, Tomas, to lead us?" Leora's voice grew firm. "I trust his courage. I trust his honor. He fights not only for his people, but for anyone who stands beside him. We have few allies in this galaxy. I will not turn away from one who offers his hand in friendship." Her words struck a chord among some of her warriors, but others still looked doubtful. She knew the decision would not be unanimous, but it did not have to be. She only needed enough of them to follow her. Hours later, under the dim light of a lantern, Leora met Tomas again at the edge of the camp. She told him that nearly half her warriors had agreed to join the humans in the defense. It's not all of them, she admitted, but they are the ones who have seen enough of war to understand what is at stake. Tomas placed a small metal emblem in her hand, a symbol of unity used by human military forces when they formed alliances. Then we stand together. Tomorrow, we will make them see that humans and your people are not to be underestimated. Leora looked at the emblem, feeling its weight. It was a simple object, but to her it meant a bridge had been built between two very different worlds. The next morning, before the first light of dawn, the combined forces took their positions along the defensive ridge. The air was cold, the ground damp from the night's mist. Soldiers whispered last words to their comrades, checked their weapons, and looked toward the horizon where the enemy would come. Leora stood near Tomas, wearing her ceremonial armor, its silver plates polished to a bright sheen. Her presence caught the eyes of both human and alien soldiers, reminding them that this was not just another skirmish, it was a stand for something larger. Tomas gave the signal for silence. No matter what comes, he said in a voice that carried over the line, we hold the ridge, we protect each other. Today, we fight as one. The soldiers let out a cheer, a single voice of defiance against the threat. Leora felt a surge of pride as she stood ready. From the distance came the first low rumble of engines. The enemy was on the move. The ground began to tremble under the weight of their machines. And yet, in that moment, Leora's heart was steady. The choice had been made. The battle was about to begin. The sun rose over the alien city, bathing the towers in soft golden light. It was the first sunrise since the end of the war, and for the first time in many years. The air was free of smoke and fear. People walked through the streets not with hurried steps but with calm faces. Markets reopened, children laughed. The sound of rebuilding had replaced the sound of destruction. Princess Orlia stood on the palace balcony, looking over her homeworld with quiet pride. The memory of the long struggle was still fresh, but the sight of peace brought a feeling of hope. She wore simple royal robes, a sign that she wished to live closer to her people now. Her guards stood at a distance, no longer with the tension of battle in their eyes. Behind her, the door opened softly. It was Marcus, the human soldier who had arrived in her life as a stranger and had become the reason her planet still stood. His uniform was clean, but carried small marks from the battles fought. His steps were steady, and his presence felt like an anchor to her. "Good morning," he said in a calm voice. Orlia turned to him with a small smile. "Good morning, Marcus. How was the meeting with the council?" They agreed to begin trade with the human worlds, Marcus replied. "It will take time, but the first step is made. Supplies will come, and in return, your people will share technology we never had." Orlia nodded. "That is a good start. My father would have been proud to see this." They walked together along the balcony, watching the streets below. Workers carried beams for rebuilding homes. Merchants set up stalls with colorful fabrics and fruits. A group of children were painting bright symbols on a wall, covering the old marks of war with art. "You've given my people something more than survival," she said after a moment. "You've given them the belief that we can stand together with others, even those who are different." Marcus looked at her with a serious expression. "You gave them that hope, Orlia. I only helped you keep it alive." They stopped near the balcony edge. In the distance, the spaceport was active again. Ships came and went, carrying messages of peace across the stars. The flag of the United Worlds flew next to the flag of her people. It was not a symbol of surrender, but of cooperation. "Will you return to Earth now?" she asked. Marcus paused. "I was ordered to come here as a soldier, but if I return now, I would be leaving as something else, not just a soldier, but someone who has a home here too." Her gaze met his. "This is your home now, if you want it to be." He smiled. "Slightly, I think I do." A soft wind moved across the balcony. The scent of flowers from the palace gardens mixed with the smell of fresh bread from the markets. It was the smell of a living city, no longer under siege. Later that day, Orlia and Marcus walked through the main square together. People stopped. To greet them, children waved. Some of the older citizens placed their hands over their hearts in thanks. Orlia noticed how the fear that once filled her people's eyes was gone. They stopped at the base of a newly built memorial. It was a tall stone pillar engraved with the names of those who had fallen. Round the base, flowers had been placed by families. At the center of the memorial, there was a carved image of two hands, one human, one alien, joined together. This is what they fought for, Orlia said softly, and what we must protect, Marcus replied. In the evening, the palace hall was filled with voices for the first peace celebration. The hall was lit with hundreds of hanging lanterns that cast warm light over the crowd. Musicians played soft tunes, and the smell of food from many cultures filled the air. Leaders from nearby worlds had come, not as rivals, but as guests. They raised glasses in honor of the new alliance. Some spoke of trade and rebuilding, others of cultural exchange. Marcus stood near Orlia, quietly watching as her people mingled with visitors. When the music changed to a slower melody, Orlia turned to Marcus. Do humans dance at peace celebrations? Marcus gave a small laugh. Sometimes, but I might not be very good at it. She extended her hand toward him. Then we will both be clumsy together. They stepped into the open space, moving slowly in rhythm to the music. Round them, people smiled, not because they were watching royalty, but because they were watching hope in motion. As the night grew late, Orlia and Marcus stepped outside into the palace gardens. The stars shone brightly above, and for the first time in years, they were not blocked by the sight of warships. This is the first time I've looked at the stars and thought of them as paths to friends instead of threats, Orlia said. Marcus looked up too. We'll make sure it stays that way. They stood there in silence for a while, the sound of the celebration faint behind them. The garden's fountains whispered in the background, and the cool night air carried the promise of a better tomorrow. Orlia finally spoke. The galaxy will remember this day, the day we chose peace over fear. Marcus nodded, and we'll guard it together. In that quiet moment, under the starlit sky, the human soldier and the alien princess knew their journey was not over, but it had changed. No longer was it about survival in the face of danger. Now, it was about building a shared future. The war was over, but their story, the story of how the very different worlds learned to trust, had only just begun.